Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to our EduSide network. Our topic of discussion today is part of our series on Vedic Times. We have been talking about later Vedic times, and this shall be a continuation from that. And for this very discussion, we have with us our same subject expert, Dr. Shankar Kumar, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Hindu College, University of Delhi. So let us welcome him and ask him to talk to us more about the later Vedic times. Thank you for coming, sir.
Thank you, Urvashi. Good afternoon, viewers. As stated, we shall continue from where we had left yesterday, talking about the developments during the Vedic period. And we had reached up to a stage where we had been talking of the redistributive mechanism, the way it was transforming in the later Vedic times, leading to some kind of distanciation between the Vaishyas on the one side and Brahmins and Kshatriyas on the other side, and therefore some kind of an iniquitous redistribution of surplus is taking place here, and that is what accords some kind of you can say social stratification value in real terms in the later Vedic times. And so that is one way in which stratification, although in its incipient form, is taking shape. And we will see in the course of our discussion as to what is the pertinence of this distanciation with respect to the fourfold Varna division, which is simultaneously crystallizing, because in the early Vedic times we have already discussed that it is only in the last portion of Rig Veda, the later portion of Rig Veda, in the Purusha Shukta hymn, that we have the reference to the four conventional Varnas, that is Brahmins, Rajanya, Kshatriya, Brahmins, Rajanya, Vaishya and Shudras. And Shudras are referred to only here and nowhere else in Rig Veda. And that tells us as to how it is crystallizing. And in the later Vedic times, we find that it is not only about some kind of ordering of society, but there is a very real material tangent to these fourfold Varna divisions. And we will see as to what characterized the relationship between different Varnas. It could be not only, it's not only as if the tension was between the upper two and the lower two Varnas, but even in the upper two Varnas, that is Brahmins and Kshatriyas, there was a lot of tension. And but in the light of the critical role that one had to play, or the two Varnas had to play in apportioning a major chunk of the surplus generated for themselves, we have some kind of cooperation also vis-a-vis the Vaishyas and the Shudras. So we shall see as to how it unfolded in the later Vedic times in the course of our discussion. Now, we had spoken about the accentuation of the distance between the upper two Varnas and the Vaishyas and Shudras on the other side. If we look at trade, because trade is yet another component of economy that we haven't spoken about. Now, in the later Vedic times, of course, in the early Vedic times, there is not much of an evidence with respect to long distance exchange of goods. Of course, at the local level it could have happened, and there is no evidence of any unit or any medium through which it was transacted, or the goods or services were transacted. So currency is not to be found in the early Vedic context. In the later Vedic times, we will see there is there is no evidence of currency as such, but you can say the forerunner of currency could already be seen in the later Vedic times, and that's what we will see. So, in terms of trade, we do find some development in the later Vedic times as compared to its virtual absence in the early Vedic period. We have explicit reference to seas, that is ocean. So, ocean, which is just non-existent in the early Vedic times, and given the geographical locale in which Rigvedic people had settled in the Saptasindhu area, as we have discussed already, of course, there is no sea or ocean in the vicinity, so it does not enter into the vocabulary of the Rigvedic literature. But in the later Vedic times, it seems that people had started moving around, and they could have encountered or they could have at least seen sea. So, there is no reference to overseas trade as such that we are implying here, but familiarity is very much testified. Then, apart from cattle, which happened to be the chief source of wealth in the Rigvedic times, and also maybe unit of exchange in some form or the other, we have reference to a term called nishk in later Vedic times, and nishk actually referred to a fixed number of gold ornament or a fixed weight of gold ornament. So, that is the sense in which it is applied. And alongside nishk, there is also reference to this term satamana. Sataman is again, it stands for a weight of gold, or it could be even silver. And it is stated that one sataman is equal to 100 krishnal. So, krishnal obviously is a smaller unit, a very small denomination of exchange that we get to see in the later Vedic times. And therefore, historians have pondered over this, that maybe that these terms have something to do in the sense of being precursor to the fully developed coinage system that had emerged by the end of later Vedic times, that is 6th century BC. So, in the later Vedic times, we do not have a full-fledged currency system as such, but we do have something with which some kind of value could be accorded to some goods or services, and that could function, or the functionality of these units could be almost similar to what currencies do in facilitating exchange and network of a complex relationship of goods and service exchange. So, that is perhaps not reaching to that level as such, but a beginning could have been made, and it is along these developments that by the end of later Vedic times, we find a full-fledged currency system in the form of the punch-marked coins, which were made of silver and probably issued by different trade guilds, merchant guilds, and so forth, which could develop around 6th century BC. So, in that sense, trade is something which starts making itself visible in the later Vedic times. Also, if we talk of trade, we should not be missing out in terms of the nagars or the towns, because again, by the time we reach 6th century BC, the end of later Vedic times, at least the North Indian landscape is dotted with several nagaras, or several cities, several urban centers, and the entire landscape is also crisscrossed by several trade routes, and it is in this sense that we are trying to see what kind of developments were already visible in the later Vedic times. Now, in the sense of nagars or the urban centers, these texts, later Vedic texts, mention about nagars only towards the end of the later Vedic times, and not in the beginning or the earlier part of its period, that is around 1000 BC. So, it is around the end of the later Vedic period, closer to 600 BC, that we find such references. And important thing to note here is that these nagaras, the way they evolved historically, generally we tend to believe that urban centers emerged in the context of trade and exchange, but going by the literary records or literary references, it seems that these urban centers could have been political centers to begin with, and not manufacturing centers. So, they became the hub of activity and human settlement on account of political reasons. And quite a few cities we see in India today which are essentially political centers. And so, not all urban centers are or have something to do with manufacturing, trade, and exchange, and so forth. Nevertheless, the process of the socio-economic differentiation, of course, continued unabated all across the later Vedic times, and archaeologically also the beginning of urbanization, which is, if we see it in continuation to the Harappan times, then it is the second wave of urbanization that we are talking of in the context of 6th century BC, the end of later Vedic times. But even in archaeological terms, in the later Vedic period, before 6th century BC, we start getting the evidence of beginning of urbanization from sites like Ahishatra, Kaushambi, Hastinapur, where urban settings are very much visible. Of course, not in its full bloomed spectacular form, the way it revealed itself in 6th century BC, but of course the delimitation of space and houses and the material involved, the civic facilities and so forth, buildings. So, they constitute the archaeological markers of an urban center, and they could be seen at the centers what we mentioned in the later Vedic times. Now, coming to the social scenario in the early Vedic and later Vedic period, the transformation part, we have already seen that by and large the early Vedic period is egalitarian in nature. Whatever differences existed in social terms could be on the basis of rank and wealth and status, maybe determined by age or sex, but certainly there is no class-like formation, there is no structural kind of gap between these social categories, or definitely there is no restriction on the access to productive resources. So, this is something which is important for us to understand, that all across the early Vedic times, whatever social difference existed amongst different social groups, by and large was on the basis of rank and wealth and status, and certainly there was no restriction on the access to productive resources on certain identified groups. Now, this is important because in the subsequent times, in the later Vedic times, we find that these restrictions on the access to productive resources are sought to be applied to certain groups, while some other groups have unqualified access to certain productive resources. Several groups are just not allowed to have access to these resources, and that's where the differentiation in economic terms or the stratification as such begins to take shape. Now, in terms of the basic social unit, of course, we find that the patriarchal family constitutes the basic social unit of the later Vedic times. And when we say patriarchal family, basically what we mean is around 3 to 4 generations of families, including bride and the groom's family. So this is a different kind of a situation with which we are not quite familiar with. Because if we look at the present state of things, it is generally either the groom's family or the bride's family, but 3 to 4 generations of brides and groom's family living together as part of one household is something which is a characteristic feature of the later Vedic times. So how do we know this? This is something interesting because such inference are drawn by historians and sociologists when they look at the range of terms for different relationships. For instance, if the paternal grandfather is referred to by one name, and on the other hand, the maternal grandfather is referred to by another name, which is not the same as that of paternal grandfather. If maternal uncle is referred to by one name and the paternal uncle is referred to by yet another name, distinct name, then one can see that there is some kind of a segregation. But in the later Vedic vocabulary related to family relations, distinct terms existed only for father, mother, brother, sister, son and daughter. The rest are all referred to by a generic term, by a common term, that is naptra. So naptra could stand for nephews, grandsons, cousins and all. So this again tells us the way we had been speaking of the grains and the variety of grains and so forth, as to how only a term yav is used for all kinds of grains. So there is no distinction as such being made in relationships beyond what we just spoke of, and that tells us that there is not much of a difference so far as the perception is concerned. And sociologists also inform us that the name of a relationship in family terms is has a lot to do with the role expectation. So if I call, say, my father with the same name as I do to my grandfather, then probably what is implied is that a father is supposed to perform the same role to me as my grandfather, or my grandfather is supposed to play the same role vis-a-vis me as I expect from my father. So there would not be two distinct names for these two relationships. So it is on these considerations that sociologists infer this kind of a social setup. Now, talking of the society in general, of course, wish is which is the root word for Vaishya, which is the common people, and they constituted the bulk of the tax-paying people in the subsequent times. And in the later Vedic context, they are the ones who are coerced into giving something in the form of bali, which earlier was voluntary and now is increasingly becoming coercive. So they constitute the material source which is somehow or the other extracted by different social groups, and it is on the basis of the resources provided, material resources provided by the wish, that the entire gamut of political institutions, social institutions and so forth rests, and over a period of time they got magnified and they became more elaborate by the end of later Vedic times. So wish appears to be a larger unit, and either it could mean a clan or maybe the entire tribe. So there are 171 references in Rig Veda itself of this term wish. And there is another term, Jan, which is at times understood as a parallel kind of a term with respect to wish. But one doesn't know, one is not very clear whether we can interchangeably use the two. Jan is equal to wish or wish is equal to Jan. There is some degree of ambivalence here. But Jan as a category is mentioned in Rig Veda around 275 times. So they appear to be important, very important social categories. And with reference to Jan, this is important to understand that there is a term which starts appearing, and that is Janapad. And in yesterday's discussion, we had said that it had important connotation with respect to the transformation of land or transformation of polity from kin-based to territory-based. So if we go by the literal meaning of the term Janapad, then if Jan stands for a tribe, then Pad is feet or foot, and implication is that the area where the tribe moves around, the area where the tribe wanders. And therefore, territoriality, therefore the territorial aspect comes into picture. And historians understand this increased reference of Janapad in the later Vedic texts as something which is symptomatic of the increased value of land on account of introduction of agriculture, or on account of people taking to agriculture in a big way, so as to replace pastoralism as the predominant way of life. And therefore Janapad is something where the ruling lineage is in fact one can notice that these Janapadas in later Vedic texts are named after usually the dominant Kshatriya lineage. And Kshatriya also here is important because by the end of later Vedic times, we find that what was earlier referred to as Rajanya in the early Vedic context, now increasingly that word is probably giving way to Kshatriya. And Kshatriya would mean that the root word here is Kshetra, which is again an area of land. And this again tells us that the Rajanya, who were supposed to look after the kin group by protecting their cattle, wealth and so forth, which was the chief form of wealth in the early Vedic times. Now their role expectation is different. They are supposed to be the protector of the area or the territory in which that particular tribe moved around. And therefore it is Janapad, and Janapad is usually named after the dominant Kshatriya lineage in that area. For instance, if we say Kuru Panchalas, then these are Kshatriya lineage names. And they refer to a particular area, a particular Janapad. So, and there are instances from 6th century BC itself of the 16 iconic Mahajanapadas. We find that quite a few Janapadas or Mahajanapadas are not named after dominant Kshatriya lineages. For instance, Magad itself is not named after. So there are different ways in which a particular Janpad came to be identified, but generally speaking, in its nascent form, in its formative phase, it is the identity of the dominant Kshatriya lineage which accorded identity to a particular Janapad in terms of its name. And that tells us about the historicity, the particular way in which a particular area came to be identified by its name. Of course, since we are talking of the social scenario, we can't afford to leave aside the Varna system as such. in the later Vedic texts, in contrast to early Vedic times, where we did speak of the later stratum, particularly the Purushashukta hymn, which is in the 10th chapter of Rig Veda. In the later Vedic literature, Brahmins are mentioned 14 times. Kshatriyas are, this is Rig Vedic data. In Rig Veda, Brahmins are mentioned 14 times, Kshatriyas are mentioned 9 times, and Shudras, as we discussed earlier, are referred to only once in the Purushashukta hymn. And the position of women as such is somewhat ambivalent, in the sense that there is a tendency in the Vedic literature to idealize the position of women, but the real position appears to be somewhat complex, and women, of course, in the early Vedic times had in certain zones, they did have access to the productive processes, as is indicated by the term Dohitra, which we did speak of earlier, where daughters are referred to as Dohitra, and in the pastoral context it is an important enterprise, milking of cow. And also weaving, which is again a household domain, and it seems to be almost monopolized by women folk in the early Vedic times. We also get to hear of the access of women to ritual and spiritual traditions in the early Vedic times. We get to hear of several women seers and those who composed and sung Vedic hymns, and child marriage is also somewhat not very common in the early Vedic times. So child marriages are known, marriage of females only after puberty. They are some positive aspects of the position of women in the early Vedic times, and alongside, there of course are some negative aspects, because we discussed that the basic unit of family is patrilineal, and so the organization of society is essentially patrilineal. We have prayers to gods for getting male child, and also praja in general, but not the daughter. So that bias for male is visible there. Most of the deities in the Rig Veda are males, and that again is argued by several historians to indicate that position of women is not exactly the way it is idealized in these texts, and there are very few women priests or women raja, so to say. So so far as the access to the highest position or authority or prestige is concerned, of course it is skewed in favor of males. But these gender aspects is not the only category of social division. We also have reference to several hostile groups in the Rig Vedic context. For instance, we have reference to Das, Dasyus. We also have reference to Panis. Now, who were these people? Dasas are, of course, we tend to identify them with their subsequent connotation as slaves. So, we generally believe that Das stands for a slave, and so in Rig Vedic context also they must have been slaves, but that's not the case. In Rig Veda, they are described as people who are rich in cattle wealth, and they are also projected to be living in puras, or the forts or fortified settlements. In other description, they are referred to as dark skinned. So, quite unlike the fair complexion of the Aryas, they are dark complexion people. In terms of physical appearance, they are projected as snub-nosed, and they are also worshippers of phallus. So, fertility cult is becoming yet another identifier of the dasas. So, overall it seems if we know about the Harappan scenario, maybe that these are the people who are living in this area from a period earlier than the coming of the Aryans, and therefore there is this kind of a distinction that they are making. So, fortified settlements, phallus worship, they are all known in the Harappan times, and maybe that the reference here is of the people who are actually living in this area ever since the Harappan times. Although there is another assertion that maybe they derive this name Das from another word which is part of Iranian vocabulary, a tribe of Iran, which is Dahae. So, that is yet another assertion. And what is important for us to understand is that the Aryans and the Dasas are usually depicted in hostile kind of interrelationship, but hostility is not the only modus of their interaction. In fact, they also had instances of cooperation and peaceful interaction. In fact, one of the Aryan rulers' name is Divodas, so suffixed with this term Das. And so, there is enough indication towards cultural intermingling in the Vedic times that we get to see so far as Aryans and Dasas are concerned. Dasyus, yet another category referred to in the Vedic literature, appear to be a set of people where the Aryan attitude was somewhat more hostile, and there are frequent references to Dasyus as involved in some kind of a conflict situation with the Aryans. So, Dasyu Hatya is killing of Dasyus is very frequently referred to in the Vedic literature, and in Iranian language, Dahayu actually meant land. And this is critical because if we subscribe to the theory of the Aryans coming from Central Asia via Iran, the Indo-Iranians who settled at Iran and did not move further east, then these kinds of comparative analysis holds some bit of promise and possibilities in terms of informing about the anteriority of these terms or implication of these terms. So, in Iranian, the Hayu actually meant land, and maybe that they constituted an earlier band of Aryans, because we know that while coming from Central Asia, they came not all at once, but they came in several batches, several bands, and maybe that some people who had earlier settled and started doing cultivation or had taken to the lifestyle of the neighboring people who had been living in this area and doing cultivation from before. So, maybe that there is that kind of connotation also associated with Dasyus. Now, the third category is that of Panis. Panis are represented as being very rich in cattle and treasure. So, they are also described as the ones who did not perform sacrifices and rituals the way Aryans did. So, certainly they appear to be of different cultural background as compared to that of the Aryans, and they also indicate that they spoke different language. And since we have spoken about it, that Aryans actually is a language group, Therefore, this identification assumes importance that they certainly are from a different cultural stock. Nevertheless, apart from these differences, we have several very complex kind of conflicts. For instance, the iconic battle of the 10 kings, which is so often talked about in the Vedic context, the Das Rajana, over the division of water of the Ravi river. And here in this battle, if you look at the kings who sided with whatever side, we find that both the sides in conflict had Vedic and non-Vedic groups aligned. So, Vedic and non-Vedic is not the sole kind of criteria or criteria of social distinction here. Pragmatic concerns probably were more important in dictating terms, in dictating the political alignments and so forth. And when such complex battles occur, like the one of the 10 kings, it tells us that the mechanism of social differentiation is very much at play, and the existing tensions are actually given outlet through such skirmishes, through such battles, and certainly in these growing social differentiation, Aryan and non-Aryan is not the sole criteria. Because as we saw in the Battle of 10 Kings itself, that there is fair degree of intermingling, and Aryans collaborating with non-Aryans, non-Aryans collaborating with the Aryans in order to settle a pragmatic issue. So all these tensions get realized across in the later Vedic times as well, and we will see that in the later Vedic period, quite unlike the absence of Varna hierarchy, as we noticed in the early Vedic times, in the later Vedic times, there is more importance attached to the Varna hierarchy as such. So that social organization that we talked of, or intensification of or realization of these tensions through such hierarchization, so they are all panning out in the later Vedic times, and it seems that there is also some kind of a theoretical attempt by the Brahmanical lawgivers to weave together the diverse social units into one set of rules, and that is what we understand by Varna rule. So it is the sheer diversity of social categories, and which necessitates the you can say attempt to weave them all together in one theoretical construct called the Varna ideology or the Varna hierarchy. And initially, it seems that it is the Arya and Das which constitute the main social division as such, where Aryas are regarded to be of different culture as compared to that of Dasas, and there is conflict in terms of material resources and so forth. But there are other propositions by different scholars as well. For instance, Romila Thapa, the noted historian, she talks of the senior and junior lineages, the senior lineage standing for the Rajanya, and the junior lineage exemplified by the Vish. And to begin with, both are linked to the productive processes, but there is some kind of a difference in terms of their access to productive process also, in the sense that the Rajanya, or what we in the later Vedic times understand as Kshatriyas, had special access to the position of leadership, and they had a crucial role to play in the redistributive mechanism that we spoke of in our earlier interaction. So, quite a few economic activities or quite a few things of pertinence is only available to the senior lineage, whereas the productive activities are of course taken care of by the wish, and here their involvement is almost total. Gradually, it seems that of the two divisions, it could be Arya Das or the senior lineage and the junior lineage, depending whatever we subscribe to in terms of the viewpoints by different scholars. What appears understandable is that over a period of time, these Varna classification widened to include the other categories, that is the Brahmins and the Shudras. And talking of Brahmins, this is also interesting that we tend to generally believe that Brahmins are associated with priestly activities ever since time immemorial, or the Vedic times and so forth. The fact of the matter is that, to begin with, in Rig Veda, there are around 17 different categories of people associated with priestly jobs or worship traditions or knowledge acquisition and so forth. And they have different names, rishis, vipra and so forth, and Brahmins are just one of the 17 such categories associated with worshipping tradition and so forth. But during the later Vedic times, it appears that Brahmins had come to monopolize all the priestly activities or activities around sacrifices and access to God or mantrocharan and so forth. So, all these activities which earlier were scattered in 17 groups with different identities, by the time we reach later Vedic period, the other 16 categories somewhat lose their relevance, and it is the Brahmins who come to monopolize all the activities related to priesthood and performing sacrificial traditions. So that is yet another important aspect that we need to understand. Of course, there are different views of scholars related to the origin of the Brahmins, and some do indicate that it might have some kind of connection, or the Brahmins could have included some practitioners of Harappan religion and indigenous tribal priests also. So that is how Brahmin as a category evolved. So that tells us about the dynamics of the evolution of Brahmin as a category from the Rig Vedic times to the later Vedic times, so much so that it is also including some priestly elements of the erstwhile Harappan religious tradition, and also some indigenous tribal priests, and therefore there is some kind of a syncretization which is happening within this category of Brahmins. Here references could be made of Vashisht and Agastya, who are regarded as the founders of different gotras, and historians do indicate that these two sages at least could be of non-Aryan origin, because they are referred to as jar born and so forth. So their origin is presented in ways and means which are different from the usual Aryan explanation for these. So the point is that and yet they are Brahmins, and very respected Brahmins, to the extent that they on their name gotras are named. So there is fair degree of heterogeneity at play in the evolution of Brahmins as a social category related to priestly activities. The notion of Gotra itself during the later Vedic times, it developed into a system of clan exogamy. If you understand the way caste system works, of course, all the castes are endogamous units in theoretical terms. There is a sense of hierarchy, there is some linkage with division of labor, so there is functionality also. So, functionality, hierarchy, and also while all these castes are endogamous groups, within that caste there is clan exogamy which is practiced with reference to Gotra. And that tells us that it is during the later Vedic times that clan exogamy started getting practiced, and that tells us about the way it got integrated with the caste system as such. So, clan exogamy is again explained or accounted for by the sociologists as some kind of a mechanism of widening the socio-political ties because new relationships were forged between unrelated people. So, this is the explanation given at a very broad level, that clan exogamy got instituted as a behavior pattern in the caste system itself on account of the sheer necessity of forging alliance or widening the socio-political ties, because this is a very happening period that we are talking of, later Vedic times. Quite a few new things are happening, people are moving into new areas, new people are coming into contact, there is cooperation, conflict, and coming together, and this required widening of socio-political ties, as is also evidenced in the Battle of 10 Kings, where the conventional Arya non-Arya division falls flat. So, it is in this context that these categories actually flourished and got instituted in Indian history, particularly in the domain of society. Later Vedic texts also stress considerably on the cooperation between Brahmins and Rajanyas, just to ensure that the proper ordering of society is kept intact. Of course, the intent here is that the subjugation or the subordination of the Vaishyas and Shudras by the two upper categories is allowed to continue, or is not allowed to be ruptured. So, that intent is almost evident in the undue stress which is laid on the need for cooperation between the Brahmins and Rajanya. But this does not mean that the two were not under some kind of a tension. There are enough references to the two categories, that is Brahmins and Rajanya, also being in fair amount of tension, and therefore the overall understanding of the relationship between a Brahmin and a Kshatriya is that of tension plus ambivalence, that is cooperation plus tension in the Vedic times. And why this is so is because the expenditure which was incurred, remember earlier we had spoken of the fact that in the later Vedic times these sacrifices became very elaborate. So, the Kshatriyas at whose behest this was carried out had to incur a lot of expenditure in order to organize these sacrifices. And of course, the Brahmins gained materially from the asymmetric redistribution that followed these sacrifices. So, this was resented probably by the Kshatriyas, whereas Kshatriyas also required the Brahmins cooperation because they were also seeking legitimacy to rule, and legitimacy to rule in a pre-constitutional times where even the traditional norms of say primogeniture or other principles, it could be divine intervention or other sources of power and authority, they were still not deep entrenched into the social psyche, and therefore since we are talking of very formative phases of polity as well, so the Kshatriyas also required that the Brahmins should somehow through these sacrifices give or accord legitimacy to the rule of the Kshatriyas, and therefore there is this kind of a symbiotic relationship developing between the two. Brahmins required the Kshatriyas for the sheer material benefit which is acquired through sacrifices and so forth, and the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas in return get the legitimacy to rule through the intervention of the Brahmins. And of course, subsequently when the principle of heredity or primogeniture got instituted, of course this dependence could have lost its relevance somewhat, but at around this time, of course the necessity of the two coming together is paramount. We have already spoken of the tendency to describe the Rajanya as Kshatriyas in the later Vedic times, which is again symptomatic of the increased instance of agriculture, thereby according value to land, and hence land which was not valued in the early Vedic times became the basis of rule, and Kshetra is more important now, territory is more important now, and hence the Raja gets associated with a particular Kshetra, and hence it is not Rajanya but Kshatriya, which becomes part of the later Vedic vocabulary. There are occasional references to Shudras also in the later Vedic texts who might have included artisans and laborers. Das and Dasis also are mentioned, but neither Shudra nor Das or Dasis appear to be very significant from the point of view of the socio-economic developments, or their involvement in the productive processes must have been very minimal. Therefore, they are of not much consequence here, and hence they do not find much of a reference in the later Vedic texts. But in a limited surplus producing society, it is also said that the value of slaves cannot be overemphasized, or value of slaves cannot be inflated beyond a proportion. So there is a limited value that slavery could have provided to the later Vedic processes of production or productive activities, because the surplus production itself was not of much degree, and it is only in the intensive surplus producing context that slave labor becomes critical. So there is not much of a sense that we get with relation to the Shudras being slaves as such in the later Vedic times, and that tells us that the kind of Varna Vyavastha that we had in the later Vedic times is still not very ossified. It is rather fluid. The sense of hierarchy and the sense of distanciation is not very pronounced. Of course, there is some element of division of labor which is very evident right from the Vedic period itself, but to say that it had become endogamous unit, it had become hereditary, and it was determined at birth, etc. Of course, in the early Vedic times, it cannot be substantiated, but in the later Vedic times, of course, there is some kind of accentuation of these tendencies, but one cannot identify one system in the later Vedic times with the kind of traits that we usually associate with the Varna Vyavastha, which are actually of a later date developments. So, say asprishyata or untouchability is something which got added to caste systems much subsequent to the later Vedic times. Similarly, subjugation of the Shudra labor for productive purpose is not of much consequence in the later Vedic times, because agriculture is not becoming so important in later Vedic times, and it is the rudimentary developments in agriculture that we are talking of in the context of later Vedic times. So these are some of the broad parameters that we should adopt in order to understand as to how society and economy and also polity, as we said, the way it moved from the kin-based to territory-based polity, the pastoral area or pasture land, and now Janapad, subsequently transforming itself into Mahajanpad. So these are the broad parameters with the help of which we should be able to visualize and recreate as to how the Vedic times must have been. And we have also spoken of the different social categories, the way they evolved, including the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, and the functions they performed, and over a period of time, the way they got transformed into the next phase, which is very critical for understanding of ancient India, that is the end of later Vedic times and the most happening century in ancient India, that is 6th century BC.
Sir, thank you so much for tracing the whole trajectory from the early to the later Vedic times. And friends, as we sign out of this lecture, of course, just to tell you, there are so many other lectures which you could go back and watch them. So with this, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you, friends, for watching. Have a great day.